Hey there, welcome to Pickled Parables. This podcast is presented by Parable Ministries as a Bible teaching resource. Thank you for joining us. Pickled Parables is a podcast about taking in and living out the Bible. Here we will study, contemplate, and testify to the Bible's incredible teachings and how it leads us to live better lives. To stay up to date with all things Parable, follow us on Instagram at parable_ministries and visit our website at parableministries.com. We hope today's message finds you well.
Well, hello everyone. Welcome back to Pickled Parables. This is another Pickled Chat. So we're going to be doing another God and Sinners. Just at the start here, I'm Hunter, and I'm joined again by Jesse Turkington. Jesse, how are you?
Hey, I'm doing well. Glad to be back.
Good. So just to kind of stick the tiger in the table and yell at it here at the beginning, we've heard your feedback. And something that we're going to try in changing the format of our God and Sinners is, instead of trying to sandwich two sinners together, which is generally, I feel like, a bad idea, instead of trying to do that in an audio and in longer form, we're going to look at one sinner per God and Sinners episode and give a little more space for that one to kind of flesh its own self out. And there might be a time where, last time we talked about some magicians. We might go back and revisit those because I think there have been some that could have used even more conversation, but because we had two, maybe we rushed through or pushed past it before we normally would have. So this God and Sinners is going to have one sinner that we're going to be focusing in on. And I'm going to be bringing for our discussion the person of Sosthenes. So and a shameless plug here, kind of almost at the gate, the way that Sosthenes has landed on my plate and has been kind of in the back of my brain, he's been bouncing around back there, is Jesse, in his reading of the book of Acts on my Dusty Bible, which I've enjoyed all of Jesse's reading on my Dusty Bible, but the book of Acts, for me, was particularly enjoyable because I feel like I got a better feel for the flow of this church history story and just kind of putting it on like an audiobook. It's one that I've gone back and listened to a couple times. So in Sosthenes, we first hear about him in the book of Acts, and we're going to get into that. But then I've also been doing some work in the book of 1 Corinthians for commentaries, and Sosthenes pops up in there. And it's one of those where it's like, I've heard this name before. And so we're going to get into it. But the sinner he relates kind of tertiarily to Saul of Tarsus, which I believe you've brought Saul before, right?
Did I bring Saul? I don't remember if I brought him.
I can't remember. I thought you had. It would have been simple for me to go back and look, but here we are. So we've at least discussed Saul and mentioned him, but Saul was a convert. He was a Jewish man who was kind of a Pharisee of his day, but he was very, very into his Judaism. He was a rigorous, devout Jewish man, and he was not a big fan of this new group of people that were followers of Jesus Christ. Sometimes they're called the Way. Sometimes I don't know if like colloquially they were known as Christians for some time, but that would have been the group. He was not a big fan. So much so that he regularly was signing off and was helping this group be persecuted, sometimes and often unto death. And so that's who Saul is. Jesus saves Saul and changes his name to Paul. It's a thing that God does a lot in the Bible. And after this conversion, you can read about it in Acts chapter 9. He then goes out on his own missionary journeys. And it's kind of the big turn in the book of Acts where it's like this guy who's kind of been the pain for the church for a good portion, or at least this beginning part, is now like the champion towards the end of the story. And to go back to the Dusty Bible part, listening to that arc like play through just in an audio and not trying to ignore the chapter headings and all this stuff in my Bible. It's super helpful, and it helps you get this like flow. But Saul, God saved Saul, and he began to be welcomed by many of the Christian groups. Some of them were a little leery of him at first, but he begins to be welcomed, and he begins to get sent out on these missions, and he goes primarily to the Gentile people. And on these missions, he goes on his second missionary journey, he goes to Athens, Greece, and on his way home, Paul stops by the port town of Corinth. And he spent a considerable amount of time in Corinth and with the Corinthian church. And so I'm going to actually jump in, and I'm going to do a kind of a maybe a no-no, but I think it's fine. I'm going to try to read. It's not a no-no to read the Bible, but I'm going to read a big section of it. So if you're listening along and you're like, "Oh man, I'm going to read it. I'm going to read a good chunk of Acts chapter 18." Because this is going to tell us the story and the scene of where Paul's at, where we meet our sinner for the week. So it says, after this, Paul left Athens and went to Corinth. He found a Jew named Aquila, a native of Pontus, recently come from Italy with his wife Priscilla, because Claudius had commanded all the Jews to leave Rome. And he went to see them, and because he was of the same trade, he stayed with them and worked, for they were tent makers by trade. And he reasoned in the synagogue every Sabbath and tried to persuade Jews and Greeks. When Silas and Timothy arrived from Macedonia, Paul was occupied with the crowd, testifying to the Jews that the Christ was Jesus. And when they opposed and reviled him, he shook out his garments and said to them, "Your blood be on your own heads. I'm innocent. From now on, I will go to the Gentiles." He left there and went to the house of a man named Titius Justus, a worshiper of God. His house was next door to the synagogue. Crispus, the ruler of the synagogue, believed in the Lord, together with his entire household. And many of the Corinthians, hearing Paul, believed and were baptized. And the Lord said to Paul one night in a vision, "Do not be afraid. Go on speaking and do not be silent, for I am with you, and no one will attack you to harm you, for I have many in this city who are my people." He stayed 1 year and 6 months, teaching the word of God among them. But when Gallio was proconsul in Achaia, the Jews made a united attack on Paul and brought him before the tribunal, saying, "This man is persuading people to worship God contrary to the law." When Paul was about to open his mouth, Gallio said to the Jews, "If it were a matter of wrongdoing or vicious crime, O Jews, I would have reason to accept your complaint. But since it is a matter of questions about words and names in your own law, see to it yourselves. I refuse to be a judge of these things." And he drove them from the tribunal. And they all seized Sosthenes, the ruler of the synagogue, and beat him in front of the tribunal. But Gallio paid no attention to any of this. So this is the first mention of Sosthenes in the Bible. It's Acts chapter 18. And there's a number of sinners in this passage that we could get sidetracked on, but Sosthenes is the one. He's lived in my brain. And it's a short mention, and we do have to do a little bit of reading between the lines to get to the heart of who he is. But by the end of the story, we're told that Sosthenes is ruler of the synagogue. And what seems to happen is when Paul arrives in Corinth, another man named Crispus is the ruler of the synagogue. And it seems that as Paul is preaching the gospel and teaching, Crispus comes to faith in Jesus Christ and is baptized by Paul. And as a result, so that baptism act, it kind of, it's kind of like you can't keep doing the leader of the synagogue thing if you've been baptized into the other religion. It's kind of one of those. So Crispus is now no longer able to be ruler of the synagogue. And so by the end of the story, Sosthenes has that role. Crispus also doesn't get much screen time. In just a little fun nerd thing in 1 Corinthians, and this, to me, this stuff sets the Bible in history. In 1 Corinthians, Paul makes a comment. He's like, "Yeah, I baptized the house of Crispus, and I'm glad I didn't baptize too many other people because you guys are a bunch of knuckleheads." That's my short version of Paul's words to the Corinthians at the beginning of his letter. But Crispus and his family and a bunch of other Christians put their faith in Jesus. Paul baptizes some of them, and by the end of the trip, we're told that there's a new senator in town. His name is Gallio, he is made senator of the region of Achaia, and it's I like, this is one of those things that, like, looking in history, it's kind of hard to tell. Mostly because when you start talking about these Roman senators who ruled this region of Achaia, this Greek kind of peninsula in the Mediterranean there, it's really hard to get a feel for. You can get an order, but there's gaps. It's kind of hard. If you look up a list, Gallio is around like the 50 to 54 AD time, and then if you look, it's like a big gap, and then it's like 70 AD they have a record of a senator, and so it's hard to tell if Gallio quit ruling and then there was no senator that we have record for, or if he ruled beyond that, but there's no mention of it. It's hard to tell. But either way, the Jews seems to relate like Gallio is senator, so we're going to try to get this guy Paul locked up. And I think they thought that Gallio was going to be a little more sympathetic to their cause. And so the Jews bring a united attack, and we're told it's united. They were all of one mind to bring Paul before Gallio to be tried and presumably thrown in prison, maybe killed. I think they were just trying to throw him in prison. But they bring him and they charge Paul with breaking the law. They don't specify to Gallio which law. I think they're trying to make it out as if it's Roman law. And then when Gallio starts asking some questions, he's like, wait. This is like a religious squabble. Go sort it out yourselves. I'm not getting a hand on this ball. But he refuses to condemn or put Paul in prison, and he says, this is a you thing. Y'all go deal with it. And then at the end of this section, we're told that they grabbed Sosthenes and beat him up because he's the ruler of the synagogue. And it's like, prompts a few questions. What did Sosthenes do to get beat up? It doesn't really spell this out for us. And this is where to figure out who Sosthenes, we kind of have to read between the lines. And so, listener, if you hear this and you're like, well, the Bible doesn't say that this is what, that is true. This is the end of the record for Sosthenes. We know that he was leader of the synagogue, and that after Paul is not sentenced to any prison time, someone grabs him and beats him up. And I say someone because there's disagreement on who did that. The way that the Greek is written, I tend toward one argument, and I'll tell you those two. So one says that it's the Greek people or the Gentile people, rather, of which Gallio, the senator of the region, the person kind of overseeing this region, would have been a part of. And that it's those who are non-Jewish Greeks who their courtroom and their forum is being used for this, that they kind of get upset that essentially the Jewish people are wasting their time. And so then they grab Sosthenes and beat him up. That is one argument. And I'll be honest, that's the one that I tend toward. Another argument that I find interesting is that it's actually the other Jewish leaders that beat Sosthenes up. It says it doesn't really specify. And when you read like, well, why would they do that? The argument there is that much like Crispus was convinced by Paul to be a believer in Jesus Christ, perhaps the reason that Paul was not jailed was because Sosthenes didn't go as hard on Paul as he should have, because maybe Sosthenes has a soft spot for Paul. I don't find that as compelling. I think it's very intriguing, but I tend to believe more that because of the comment where it says Gallio sees it and doesn't do anything about it, he's like, tough luck, Sosthenes. I tend more toward it being the Gentile people who beat Sosthenes up, and Gallio's like, yeah, I'm not doing anything about this. You're wasting our time. Where if he would have had this Jewish group of people beating up another person in their forum, I think he would have done something. Maybe not. But that's kind of the two claims. Like I said, I tend more toward it being the Gentiles who attack Sosthenes, because I think at this point, Sosthenes, also Acts said it was a united front. I think Sosthenes truly was trying to get Paul arrested. And that's why I bring him as our sinner, because the irony of who Sosthenes is, and the irony of this should not be missed. Paul is on the other side of it now. He used to be in the place, not in charge of the synagogue, But he kind of used to be in the Sosthenes role of the story, where he's bringing the Christian before whoever to be condemned. And now Paul is staring down this Jewish man who's leader of the synagogue, and he's on the receiving end of the persecution. And that's big. And I think that would be pretty striking to Paul. I think those who knew Paul, and I think a lot of these people did, I think that they would be understanding the weight of Paul being drugged, and it happens a lot. And he is put in prison in time. So they beat up Sosthenes. Paul's in Corinth a little longer, and then he leaves. 3 to 4 years later, Paul is in a town called Ephesus. And in the time frame between, a lot has happened. Paul writes to the Corinthians in a letter that is not in our Bibles. Scholars call it Corinthians A. I learned that. I knew there was this letter. I didn't know what it's called. It's called Corinthians A. A believer named Phoebe sends a report to Paul telling about some struggles that the Corinthian church is having while he's gone. Sosthenes is sent to Paul, asks some questions about church governance. Paul sends Timothy to Corinth, and he says, you need to go back and get these guys in order. They're struggling out there. And then it's during this time that Paul writes and sends a second letter to the Corinthians, which is what we call 1 Corinthians. And so he's had correspondence with the Church of Corinth up until this time. And I share all this because this is where we get to the rub of Sosthenes. So remember, Sosthenes is on the side of like trying to get Paul locked up, slow the spread of the gospel. And so I'm going to read 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 1, the introduction to the letter to the Corinthians. Paul says, Paul, called by the will of God to be an apostle of Jesus Christ, and our brother Sosthenes. He's given some credit as being a co-author or a co-sender of the letter to the Corinthians. And I want to note, we don't know, like, I do not know. We don't get like a last name or who Sosthenes' dad was so we can compare. So we don't know that this is the exact same Sosthenes. Like, it could be two guys with the same name who both have a history in Corinth. However, this is where I, as a reader of the Bible, and this is what's been rattling around in my brain, I like to believe that it is the same man. And the reason I like to believe that, and listener, if you hear this and you go, I don't think so, that's totally fine. It doesn't negate the fact that Paul faced down this very ironic persecution. And then I think we also should acknowledge that Paul goes out of his way to identify a man named Sosthenes at the beginning of 1 Corinthians. And I think we have more work to do with, like, why would he do that? If, what's the connection? Because he's not mentioned anywhere else. These are the two. And so it's an amazing testament. This guy who 3 to 4 years earlier was trying to jail Paul and stop the spread of the gospel. And in this time has come, just like Crispus, the former head of the synagogue, to faith in Jesus Christ, to where Paul, when he writes his letter to the Corinthians, calls him a brother. And it, for me, it's this amazing testament is like, Paul was this sinner who Jesus saved, and he, as a result, turned around and went on these missions that spread the gospel to all these people. And Paul didn't forget who he was before he was saved. And this is something that I think is important to the life of the believer, is like, it can be, there can be a lot of pain and trauma and frustration and honestly guilt related to our lives before Jesus. But one of the beauties of who God is how he uses our life before Jesus to impact maybe us, maybe others after we have been saved by Jesus. And I think that's what we see happening with Paul, because it could have been so easy for Paul to be persecuted by Sosthenes and go, psh, I'm done. Bye, bud. I'm not messing with you. You can go kick rocks. You tried to get me locked up, and I'm not hanging out with you. But it seems, at least to some degree, whether it's passively or through Paul seeking Sosthenes out, Sosthenes has come to faith in Jesus Christ, just like Paul did. And it's a good reminder, that Paul reminds us that, there's nobody that has done too much to receive God's grace. And Sosthenes is kind of on the other end of that to remind us is like, and sometimes the degree to which God saves us is so crucial because of the impact it can have on people we don't even know. In this case, Sosthenes seems to be saved. Paul calls him a brother. I like to believe that it's the same man, and I choose to believe it's the same man. And there's not really any data to prove that he is or is not. So I choose to believe he is. But there's not many people that are more suited to speak to Sosthenes' specific sin of like persecuting God's people than the Apostle Paul. Like, pretty good man to be able to speak to this. And the fact that Paul doesn't miss the opportunity and that Paul's past is not wasted. Even it seems Paul's sin when he was Saul is redeemed in the person of Sosthenes. It's like, remember when you were just like him? There's a message for him too, and he might need to hear it. And it seems like he did by the time we get to 1 Corinthians. And so that's kind of like my little nerd ramble about Sosthenes. I've been just kind of dwelling on him as a character. And I've also been reminding myself as I go through Corinthians that this is also from this guy who was trying to get, Paul locked up, and he is also helping Paul send this letter. So it makes that letter seem as if, hey guys, this is a unified front. This is not like, oh, we've got divisions. Remember when we were fighting when we were there 3 or 4 years ago? Not anymore. We're both in agreement. Y'all need to get it together. And boy, in Corinthians, do they tell him to get it together. But that's a story for another time. So that's Sosthenes, Jesse. I'll kind of be quiet because I've been talking for like 20 minutes. Do you have any like initial thoughts or questions or things related to the person of Sosthenes that you want to flesh out?
Hunter, this is a great poll. The way you find, like when we have these conversations, I love how you pull these obscure guys out of the Bible who have one verse claim to fame, and then you examine them with the microscope. It's fascinating. This one in particular is so cool. Yeah. I love that way you painted the story in comparison to Saul, now Paul, and how the roles have become reversed, where Paul's now the one being taken to court.
Yeah,
that's great, man. That's great insight. That's a cool thing.
Yeah, like I said, it's been bouncing around for like a month and a half, and I'm like, man, I want to figure out how to, because I love doing commentaries, but sometimes it's tough to, in just a paragraph and in like 10 minutes or less, flesh out this idea.
Yeah.
And I'm like, man, this is a lot. And this is going to become more of like a person study than. So that's why you were like, do you want to go first? Or I was like, oh, yeah. Actually, I got somebody to talk about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Thank you.
Man, I remember Sosthenes specifically from reading or recording My Dusty Bible. I looked up his name a few times and stumbled over it a few times, even though he's mentioned twice in 2 different books.
Yeah. Well, and that type thing also is it for me. I go, how many times I have read Acts. I mean, Acts is a pretty popular book to go through, and I've read Acts countless times. And 1 Corinthians is a pretty popular letter. It's like one of the 4 or 5 big letters that people go to in the Bible. And I've interacted with this letter in this book of the Bible so many times. I've never put 1 and 1. Like it's one of those where, and then that makes me go, how many more of these little nuggets are out there that I haven't, fished out, especially when you start getting into nameless in the Old Testament. It's like, who's buried in there that I haven't just made the connection? Yeah. But what do you think about that idea? A lot of times when we do the God and sinners, it's like, how does God, but that idea that God like redeems our past in the sense like he doesn't change it. He doesn't make it untrue that Paul, when he was Saul, like was persecuting Christians unto death at times. He doesn't make that untrue, but he does redeem it. What do you think about that idea? Like,
I think it's a beautiful idea. And I think it's very true how people with a very ugly past that they're ashamed of can be turned into something that benefits other people, something that leads them to a place they wouldn't have gotten to without that stuff, which sucks, but they got there, you know?
Yeah.
It's a way of I guess looking at a bigger perspective. We so easily get stuck on the things right in front of us. But when we look up for a moment and allow our perspective to try to encompass God's view, God's role, and see how he can take things and change them into such good things, it makes me think of Joseph from Genesis. It's a hard verse. A lot of people have a hard time with it. But at the very end of Genesis, he says, Joseph, you went, I meant this for you. All these bad things you went through, I purposed it for you. Not meaning I used it. I let the bad things happen to you and I just used that. It's directly being stated that God purposed these bad things so that good things would happen. And it's a wild thing to think about. It's hard because we don't have that kind of control. And so in our mind, it's like, how's that? How can you do that? You can't do that. It's hard, but it's a beautiful thing when it happens. For Joseph, the whole family got saved, the whole nation got saved, and it led into other things that got bad, but also that turned into good too. It's just a whole repeat throughout the Bible of the Lord using bad things for good things. Wait, didn't even Paul say that? All things work together for the good.
Yeah, Romans 8, Romans 10.
Okay,
it is Romans 8:28.
Can you read the full verse? Because I didn't finish it.
I will. It says, and we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good, for those who are called according to his purpose. And then he has something to say about predestination in the next verse, but we don't need to get into that right now.
Yeah.
It definitely means strict predestination, like it is generally interpreted through the eyes of John Calvin. So that's I'm done.
Anyhow,
I'm being good now.
Sosthenes.
Sosthenes. Yeah. No, he's an interesting character. I also would love to know. It's one of those things, Jesse, like we're kind of off the sinner, God using the sin conversation a little bit. And it's one of those things where this is the stuff. So like you hear the people that are like, oh, when we get into the kingdom or when we get into glory or when I get to heaven or whatever they throw at the end of that is how they flesh out their Christian eschatology. But whatever that is, like when we're in that moment where we're going to be enjoying God forever, this is the stuff that I want details on. Like I want boots on the ground going like, okay, so Crispus, I want to know more about what he was up to. Like, because he says he's saved and now he's not allowed to be synagogue ruler. So I want to know more about that story. Because I think, or like, the Roman jailer that gets converted when Paul and Silas, I think it was, were in, and it's like, so what's his life like after that? Like, because it doesn't say, and he quit being a Roman jailer. Same job, maybe. I don't know. Maybe they didn't put up with it. We don't get a lot of that. It's not really the point. But it's one of those where when I start reading some of this stuff, and then my brain starts to have its own level of ADHD, that I'm like, but wait, how come the Bible isn't written like modern literature and fleshes out like the color of people's shirts while I read? I want to know. Yeah, that's just a me thing though. But yeah, Jesse, do you think Have you noticed? I'm trying to figure out how to ask this without leading you, but also to let you know that I am kind of want your
Okay.
yeah. In churches today, do you think that we discuss not sin, but like, do you think we are as open about who we are before Jesus as we should be?
Oh.
Does that make sense?
Oh. Depends on the church, I suppose.
Okay.
If we're talking Protestantism, no. If we're talking Catholicism, I mean, probably you go to confession.
That's true.
Though that's not being shared with the whole church. I mean, that's up to your discretion. But I've gone to many. I'll just talk from experience. How's that?
Yeah.
I've gone to many churches where you're often trying to put your best foot forward. You know, you're trying to dress up nice. It depends which part of the country of the United States you go to for church. I grew up in the west side, the West Coast side, and we don't dress up a lot, ever. Maybe
Come as
for
you
weddings. Yeah, sometimes for weddings, typically jeans, button-up shirt, maybe a tie. But it's not often. I mean, you'll get people who will wear a suit or something like that on a Sunday. I lived in the Midwest for a while, and that was, you know, put on your Sunday best. But not a lot of people have a lot of Sunday best things, so it's pretty much on par. But they're trying. Is the difference. The more east you go, the fancier you get, I find.
Yeah.
Where you're putting on different things.
Yeah.
What I'm trying to say with all this is it just depends on the culture of the church, where if you're come as you are type culture,
Right.
yeah, you're probably more inclined to talk about the way you are than if you're trying to fit in with a group that looks nice, where everyone seems perfect because they don't talk about anything wrong. And so you're like, well, I guess I have to be perfect too.
Yeah.
There's danger in that, you know?
Yeah. I do. I that is exactly what I was kind of curious if you had noticed any, because I feel like that, you know, like you said, out here, this is not a comment on whether it's bad or not. I'm just saying it's an observation. But we have like coffee shop Christianity a little bit, where it's like, it's totally fine, you know, bring your Starbucks. And listen, I'm guilty. I do it. But like, bring your Starbucks in. It's your Bible's on your phone. It's fine. Like, and that's not bad. I'm not saying, but like, I do think, and I think it happens maybe in smaller groups more, where it's like, hey, like, this is who I was. Mm-hmm. And I think sometimes people, you know, they get saved, and listener, if you hear this and you're like, some of you have maybe like, well, he's rambling, I ain't listening. But some of you are like, wait. Like, my past is not good. Like, it's real bad. And it can take time to come to grips with like being comfortable sharing that past. But absolutely always tell the story about how Jesus has saved you. But there is value in sharing what your life was like before Jesus. And not everybody's is as extreme. You know, there are extreme examples of that. But everybody's life before Jesus, I think, is important to share because of things like Sosthenes. You know, and I'm sure Sosthenes was aware of Paul's status and who he was before. And if he wasn't, you know, I trust that that was part of what Paul shared. But imagine that Paul is like, yeah, I don't want him to know. I don't want him to know. And then Sosthenes starts doing this. You know, it might have had a different outcome than Paul being willing to say, hey, yeah, I was a knucklehead too. So let me tell you, you know, you're not too far gone. Yeah. And I think the other part of it that I'm rambling on now is like, it's good news that we've been saved by Jesus, and it's okay to acknowledge the bad part of the past of that we have, especially when we're giving testimony to how God is working. And I feel like sometimes I hear more about like, oh, this is what Jesus is doing in my life now. and less of like how has he used some of this bad stuff back here. I think it's because we don't like to dwell on the past or like things that make us uncomfortable, but little cultural psychology mixed with our Christianity there. I don't know. Well, Jesse, do you have any parting thoughts about Sosthenes?
He seems like a nice guy. I wish him the best.
I think he came around. Yeah, I have a lot of questions about him. I wish I had more on him sometimes and others, but we don't. And so that's kind of where, like I said, we get to kind of play with the information that we have and speculate. And there might be some dangers in doing that, but cling to the facts that you have in the Bible and be open to figuring out some of those in-between things and acknowledge that, like I said, I could be totally wrong. It could be two separate people, and that's fine. 1 Corinthians is still just as valuable to me, and the story in Acts is still just as valuable to me. It's more intriguing for me to think that it's the same man. So
yeah, I think the coolest bit that you shared is Sosthenes being in the role of Saul, while Paul, who was Saul, is in the spot that he was putting his prisoners in. It's just a fascinating, it's just a wonderful twist of narrative. And it's
the shoe's on the other foot now.
Yeah.
It's like, no. Yeah. I even wonder, I would love, like, if Paul was like, oh, like if he realized it, if he's like, oh man, yeah, I'm going to be here a lot. I think I'm going to be on the other side of this a lot. Yeah. It also, oh my gosh. And then I'm like, so Stephen, the stoning of Stephen. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like and this is one of those where I think anytime you talk about heaven and the afterlife, and, there is an amount of speculation that happens in all Christians. We have some facts that we can, and some data and promises that we can read in the Bible, and we have some descriptions of things in the book of Revelation, but there is a lot that is left to some imagination. And I like to think that we will be able to interact with, the saints of old, and the saints to come. And so I also am like, what was the conversation, Stephen and Paul, like, because I don't believe that it's just like Stephen's like, yeah, that never happened. I do think that there's something about the saving work of Jesus Christ, that even makes that reunion and redeems, he redeems the whole mess of it, and to where they can have unity and fellowship. I'm just intrigued by that thought. Mm-hmm. But here I'm rambling.
And we could even see like the heart of Stephen in his death, to the point of like, Lord, they don't know what they're doing.
Right.
I can imagine a Stephen with the unbridled fullness of the Lord's presence.
Right.
I can imagine him meeting a Paul and going, "You made it! Like,
yeah,
you got here."
Right. He's pumped for him.
Yeah, I can totally imagine that.
Yeah, that's cool. And for me, I think, okay, you've hit exactly what I was trying to say. For me, that is the vibe, or like the feeling that I get when Paul is like writing to the Corinthians and he goes, and also from Sosthenes, our brother. It's like, hey, there's no hard feelings, dude. You made it. Come on over here. Help me send this letter, because, you and I both care about this little town. Yeah. And they need a letter. You just got a letter. Oh, I won't sing the Blues Clues version, but all I can think of is the church in Corinth, and they're sitting around, and it's like, you just got a letter, and they start reading, and then they're like, wait, we need to not read this in front of everybody. Let's we need to vet this one anyway.
Yeah.
Well, cool. Well, that's Sosthenes. It'll be a couple months, about 2 months from the point that folks hear this, and we'll have another God and Sinners, and Jesse's gonna prep one.
Yeah, it'll be good.
It'll be good. Well, alrighty, guys. Well, thank you all for being here and for joining us. I don't think we've said it yet. We're not, we're probably a month or so in, but Happy New Year.
Oh yeah, Happy New Year.
Yeah,
it's a new year.
Happy New Year. Yeah. These are recorded a little bit ahead of time, only for our editing and our editor, Eric, to not have to pull his hair out sometimes. And so, Happy New Year if you're hearing this towards, February-ish. It's okay. February's short. Just pretend like it was January when you heard it. But yeah, thank you guys for being here. Jesse, thanks for being along with me and letting me nerd out a little bit. Awesome. Well, we will catch you guys next time. Bye, y'all.
Toodaloo.
Thank you for listening to Pickled Parables. If you enjoyed this message, please rate us, subscribe, and share with your friends. If you're interested in more things like this, check out our secondary podcast called My Dusty Bible. To stay up to date with all things Parable, follow us on Instagram at Parable_Ministries and visit our website at parableministries.com. Parable is a volunteer organization, and we would deeply appreciate your prayers. Thank you for joining us today. We'll catch you later.